Every day, millions of Australians try to make sense of a $10 trillion property market by staring at a single variable. Open any news app, and headlines focus almost entirely on interest rates. We are told that an RBA rate cut will guarantee an immediate buying frenzy, or that a sudden bump in building approvals will crash house prices overnight. I've watched buyers freeze or stall because one person's story, a worried parent, or even a taxi driver on the way to an inspection, carried more weight in that moment than 20 years of market history. One voice from a single source creates noise that costs people real opportunities. Consuming a constant stream of isolated opinions does not make you an informed buyer. It leaves you paralyzed. You sit on the sidelines waiting for a perfect headline, while the market simply moves on without you. To find the signal in that noise, HTAG Analytics tracked over 7,200 suburban markets since 2003. Their research identified 5 macroeconomic forces that work together to explain nearly all the variation in Australian property prices over the last 2 decades. Once you understand how these forces interact, you stop reacting to daily panic. Because the true cost of waiting for a single perfect headline is missing out on compounding equity that you can never get back. The first force is credit acceleration. This tracks the speed at which new mortgage lending is expanding across the entire economy. The flat line is the official PASH rate dominating the media, but the curve pulling away represents actual borrowing capacity. Lenders compete, risk appetites shift, and the pipeline of pre-approvals expands, regardless of the official numbers published by the Reserve Bank. Watching the headline cash rate is easy, but it creates a massive blind spot. Getting an accurate read on real purchasing power requires the heavier lifting of tracking complex credit conditions on the ground. The second engine is migration demand. The frequent mistake here is assuming that an influx of new arrivals impacts housing prices immediately. The data shows a 3-year lag. At year 0, migrants arrive and rent. They spend 3 years building credit and savings. Because of this lag, Australia's massive 2022 intake is just now converting into active buyers, flooding the market through 2025 and 2026. Because migration demand operates on a delay, reading today's population headlines tells you almost nothing about today's buyer competition. You have to look backwards to know exactly what the market is doing right now. The third force is monetary policy. Most commentary obsesses over the exact percentage rate, but the direction those rates are moving dictates market psychology far more than the absolute number. These gauges map 2 very different environments. A market where rates sit high at 6% but are clearly trending downward generates intense buyer confidence. Contrast that with a market sitting low at 4% but ticking upward, which immediately restricts lending and creates caution. Acting on a downward rate trend early requires a specific trade-off. You have to absorb higher absolute holding costs initially, trading early cash flow for the multi-year uplift that eventually follows an easing cycle. The fourth force is residential supply. It is the slowest moving constraint in this framework. When media reports a surge in building approvals, it takes up to 36 months to translate into actual keys. And when those properties arrive, they don't distribute evenly. Inner-city apartments do nothing to ease acute regional housing shortages. Policy impacts take years to mature, and new supply arrives at a crawl. Applying generalized national data to highly constrained local suburbs is a fast way to make a very expensive mistake. The fifth force is market momentum. Buyers often fear entering a suburb that has recently seen strong growth, assuming the opportunity has already passed. This loop shows the mechanics of momentum. Rising property prices create new equity. That equity gives homeowners the financial confidence to upgrade or invest. Their activity brings fresh demand to the market, which in turn drives prices up again. Statistical history proves that markets that outperformed last year are highly likely to outperform this year. This self-reinforcing cycle persists until a severe macroeconomic shock, like a sharp credit contraction, forces it to stop. This radar chart plots the current convergence of all 5 forces. Right now, credit acceleration, migration demand, and momentum are strongly positive. Monetary policy and supply are transitioning in the middle. With 3 forces pushing and 2 still catching up, we aren't seeing the alignment that creates a massive boom. But because the core demand drivers are so strong, the market finds a floor. The result is the steady, moderate growth we're seeing across most of the country in 2025. Understanding the macroeconomic data is the first step. The second is applying it to your exact financial position. Let's look at this decision tree. Depending on your goals, you're walking one of two paths: the first-time buyer or the strategic portfolio investor. For the first-time buyer, adopting this framework replaces paralysis with action. You trade the impossible goal of perfectly timing the absolute market bottom for the confidence to enter early and secure sustainable growth. The portfolio investor ignores generalized reports. They use hyper-localized data to pinpoint suburbs with acute supply constraints. They sacrifice easy answers to gain a quantifiable structural edge over the rest of the market. Executing the investor path successfully requires hundreds of hours digging through thousands of suburban data points, or partnering with brokers who have already built and stress-tested the framework. Information without localized guidance is just noise. Your next property will likely be the most expensive financial decision you make. Base it on the confluence of these 5 real forces, not whatever headline happens to be running today.